computer. Okay, I think okay. Uh, you're able to see me, is it? Whoever is connected. Um, okay, let's see. MK is connected, I think. Okay. Are you able to project the screen? You said the microphone is not working. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, then that's fine.
Okay, then that's fine.
I'll go ahead and start. Let's see. I'll close this out. Okay, and then close this out. Yeah, the as far as the assignment, this is what I had set up. I don't know how much we are going to. We have about an hour, so I wanted to continue with well, two parts of it. One is continuing with some of the authentication authorization, but also um, since the main concept with the users is really this part with inheritance. So that's one piece that I want you to understand. And really, when I say understanding, it's translating from your design into the implementation in C Sharp and Visual Studio. The other is, in addition to inheritance, to start looking at how we implement association classes and associations. And also when we are populating, so there is, last class I mentioned, there's a very, these are part of the framework, the library that Microsoft provides us. So the way we connect to the database and move the data for these, anything that's an inheritance from identity user and the role, they are different from how you connect to the database and insert data into other tables that represent other classes like vehicle. So, so that's something I want to start the discussion on. The assignment that I'd given you was mainly related to the app users, the different types of the inherited classes from app user, namely officer, supervisor, mechanic. Okay, so that's one part of the discussion. And again, one of the things I was talking to section one, the reason I want you to apply this, so the specific username passwords I've given here. So what I will do is for checking, I will use these username passwords. You obviously should get the code in and push it to Azure DevOps by midnight on Friday. So let me go through this discussion. So mainly I'm going to focus, let me close this out. Um, I'm going to focus on this part. So over here, identity user, role, app user, and the subclasses, I'm going to go with supervisor, officer. Not sure if I'll get to the association between them. And then I will leave mechanic for you to work through so that for everything I keep mentioning, I want you to apply it. Some of you are doing it very well, but ultimately, my interest is that you learn it well enough so that you can use it, whether it's in an interview when you're discussing or if you are using it even afterwards professionally when you're in a job. So I, I posted, these are emails I received in the past 10 days or so. And these are, you can see grads from 3 years, 5 years. Sometimes I receive it even from 10, 15 years. So again, I keep saying this is a link to it's you can read it maybe sometime later, but the main gist of this is that the grades and degrees by themselves don't really mean much. Like if you're relying on a grade to say, well, I have completed systems courses because I have a passing grade on it, that doesn't mean anything. What really means something is if you understood the concept, you can explain it in an interview, in a workplace, like how these students had actually used what we do in our classes. That's what I'm hoping that all of you can do. And I keep giving MK as an example. I want all of you to have jobs or whatever. Some of you want to go into graduate school. And my motivation is there's some value from these courses that you can use. Um, so don't just go through the motions of saying, I'm just going to do checkbox to get a grade. Again, the one of the things that makes me the most sad is to get some email messages from some of our grads saying, well, it's been a year, I've been trying to get a job, but I've not been able to find anything. And the longer after graduation, the harder it gets to get anything IT or MIS related because the expectation is you're keeping yourself current. So, anyways, that's why I want you to be as much as I'm telling you, I want you to do it for yourself. And obviously, as far as your group project, I've given you the feedback. So please, again, some of the groups are well on top of it. This is where I can see you really understood and are able to apply it because it's a entirely different set of requirements. So, and this is what, again, if you see what I posted in the email, this is what companies, supervisors are looking for, that you can take if you're given a project, a problem, you are able to do it on your own. So the group project is one where you are going off and applying it and taking it in your I'm there to ask questions, to provide some guidance, but ultimately you should take ownership. And then like as I said, some groups have met it entirely, the others where I've said, okay, you have to make changes, then make those changes and push the changes before beginning of like by midnight of Monday, so that I can give you some response for the next Tuesday's class. Um, Again, you should take ownership to work on it and make changes. Like some of the groups have like again, I gave very specific suggestions. So work on it and get back to me. The longer you, I mean, one part is the grade. The longer you don't work on it, the less the score is going to be. But the other is the implementation also gets delayed. Anyways, those are the two things. So so keep in mind that we want to get this functional and pushed out. Okay, so let me get to where we were end of last class and then use that as a starting point. Uh, the the big picture comes in the class diagram. I know that some of you don't have this, uh, but the parent class or the uh, for all of the subclasses here uh, in this diagram, the parent, what we see is app user, but what, as I told you, what Microsoft has provided through the library is identity user. So all of these properties are already there, so you don't have to bring them in. The main things I need to mention, ID, is given to you by identity user. It's going to be auto-generated. It's a string. And because it's inheritance, all of these classes here, app user, supervisor, officer, mechanic, all of them have the same ID property available. Okay. So you never want to bring ID into any of these subclasses. But every other class, vehicle, even this supervisors, which is an association class, all of them are going to have their own ID properties. But I think for today, I'm just going to go into the subclasses. I don't think we'll have time for anything beyond that. Okay, so that's the big picture. So we'll be going back and forth between the details and the big picture. Okay. Um, so let me go into this class. Um, One of the things that Microsoft has done with this version of MVC is that um, I put these breakpoints. I'll come back to them a little later. The way, and I also keep saying that when you're connecting up, so whatever we are doing here, we want it to be reflected on the tables in the database. Okay, so the database that I'm using, so you should be um, also connecting up to your database. Okay, so and I'd asked you last class, so when we ran these statements on C Sharp in Visual Studio, they were connecting up to the database. And I was also mentioning to you that this application DB context is, you can think of it as the database. It's the class that represents the database inside of Visual Studio and C Sharp. Now, we created these tables and started populating the ones to let's see, this is, I need to go to section 2. So let's see if I can get to section 2. My last. Okay. I said that, okay, the first one that I wanted to check was whether this role, admin role, was being sent to the database, and the table where I need to go in and check, select all from ASP.NET roles. So if I run this, it gives me the admin role. Okay, and then the second one was I wanted to create users. And I told you the first user would be somebody who is not in any role, but just has an account which they can use to log in. The second one is in an admin role. Okay, so let's see if those two users were created. Okay, and you can see both of them were created. Now, the first one is in no role. That's why I called. I sort of used the names to indicate whether they are associated with roles or not. The second user is connected with an admin role, and so end of last class, I told you, okay, we now know that the roles populating the roles table, connecting and populating worked, connecting and populating users worked. Now, can we figure out uh, if connecting, well, populating admin and this admin user, we need to connect with this role? How do we know whether it worked or not? Can somebody tell me where so one of the things I keep mentioning is I want to, so you shouldn't be coming to me and asking, well, did this work? So again, think of yourself, you're working with a group or with a manager, and they've given you an assignment. So before you tell the manager I've gotten everything working, you have to do the test to see have you actually gotten it to work. So what is the test here to see whether the admin is actually this particular user is actually in the role that they're supposed to be in. We can say, well, we wrote the code, it's building, it's running, but what's the final validation that it actually has worked? Anyone? Um, let's see, I guess I have to look inside Zoom now to see if you have a comment. Uh, I don't know if anyone is, so how many of you are connected? 9 of you. Okay. You can tell MK if you are, maybe MK can type it in. I want at least some of you, or at least think about it, even if you're not answering, I want you to think, because this is one of those fundamental concepts, right, which you have been discussing, associations. Okay, what Christian has said. ASP.NET user roles, okay? We spoke about this. Where is my big picture? Right here. Okay, this is a many-to-many association, right? Now, role is associated with user many-to-many, which means that if you go into the details, and this is what I want you to make the connection. You have the design. Now, when you start drilling down into the implementation, you should understand, like Christian pointed out, users roles. User roles is the connecting link. Okay. It's a many-to-many association, so it has its own table. Uh, so if we say select all from ASP.NET user roles. Um, okay, so this is your validation. You can see, and the way you validate, you have the ID that's auto-generated for the role, which is 2A6 and so on. So that's the role ID here. And the user who is in that role is test2.admin with 80BBA. So that's how the connection is being made. Okay. So as Christian, so that's what you need to think. So this validates all that you needed to do. So the connections were set up. So now let's look at how we can create some subclasses of app user and create users in those roles. Okay. Um, there is one other concept that I should point out that actually a student in this first section had asked. So each time we keep running this, it should actually, previous versions of MVC would actually generate errors if you try to insert the same role or the same user. And remember that no user can have, no, only one user can have this username. If you try to have a second user with the same username, it's an error. But this version of MVC, the updated version of .NET and MVC are sort of hiding this as it's generating some warning message, but it's behind the scenes, which actually is more problematic. What you need to be doing is really you wanted to encapsulate and prevent the same value from occurring multiple times. So I do want to add more roles. I told you that we are going to have, if you look at the big picture, we want to have roles with supervisor, officer, and mechanic. So I will add so admin role, I'll add officer role. This is to prevent hard coding. So I'll just give variables here, officer role, then supervisor role, say supervisor, string mechanic role. Okay. Now, the part that I was discussing is if I run these, and I'm just going to do a quick copy paste for all roles. Okay, so not just admin. So I want to insert all the roles into the database. So this will be the roles table. Okay. And to make it a little easier, I'm just going to copy this. Uh, Later on, you can like was okay. This is officer role. The next one will be, so the only thing I need to keep changing is the value of the name of the variable for the role itself. So this is supervisor. And finally, it's the mechanic. Z. Okay. So one of the things is that if I keep running this multiple times, this it doesn't generate an explicit error, but basically it's saying it'll give you an error message behind the scenes saying you are trying to insert the same role name. So what we want to do is populate the table, these roles table with all those four values that we have. And then once we have populated it with that, we are not going to change it. We are going to keep it as is, but we don't want to keep sort of repopulating it every time. Now, the way you do it is if you want to populate it only if there is, and this is, remember, this is what we call the name of the class itself was seed. We are seeding the initial database, right? That was the purpose of this entire exercise here. Now, this is to get us started to do our testing and so on. But once the user has the user interface, they will be creating roles and users through the UI. But for initially, we are seeding the database, setting up our functionality, testing it through this. So that's why we are calling this seeding the database, initializing it. So, but we don't want to be entering the same values again and again. And as I said, previous versions used to explicitly give error messages. Now they are sort of behind the scenes, but still they're considered errors. So what we want to do is to check if this roles table already has any data in it. And if it already has any data, so we are going to go into roles and check if there is any data inside of it. Okay, so what this basically does is in the database, there's this roles table, which is basically this table here, ASP.NET roles. And then it asks, are there any rows inside of that table? Now, if there are any rows inside, we we don't want to populate because it's going to be the same set of data that we are inserting. Okay, so what we are looking for is we want to see if there is no data inside. So so what do I need to add to this statement to check? So this will come out as true even if there is one row inside, okay? Now we want the opposite condition. we want it to come out as true if there is no row inside. Okay. So what is the easiest way to check for true for the opposite of this condition? What is the logical operator that you would use to check for the opposite of this? Anyone? It's literally a single character. What's that operator? Again, I don't want to just write it down. I just want you to think a little bit as we go through this discussion. Okay, somebody has posted. Okay, it's Christian again. Okay, it is what he pointed out. It's the not logical symbol. So not. So if there is nothing inside, then we want to go and populate. And the same thing I'll do for, I think I can use this for app user. Don't know if I should. Yeah, I'll just try using the app user itself. If okay, this is it again. The template is coming for roles. Let me change it to users or app user. I'm just trying to see which one would be more appropriate. Let me first try users and see if that so app user would also work. But the same logic here for all the users, I want to encapsulate it so that I only populate once and don't try to insert the same user more than once. Okay, I'll build this so that I make sure it is working. And then what I want to do, and this is part of why MVC is so useful for doing agile development. I'm going to, so since I've been adding some code, I want to clear this out, okay, whatever I have here. I want this database to be cleared out. And I mentioned this, I believe, one of the earlier classes a few weeks ago. If you want to clear this out, um, update dash database space 0. So if I want to totally wipe out the database and do some checking now to see, okay, if I were to run this, what happens? But first I'll just clear it out. Okay, so now if I go back and right click on tables, refresh, there shouldn't be anything. So this, I've basically cleared out all the tables, which means none of the data is there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is before I go ahead and repopulate the tables as well as the data inside the tables, I'm going to go in. Let me do this for officer. Uh, I'm let's see. So app user, it's inheriting from app user. So I'm going to go ahead and see what I'm going to need is something like, let me open up app user. So the main thing I need here is, are there any properties that I need that are separate for officer? So I'll go back to my big picture here and ask, so I don't see any property of officer that's different from app user, so I don't need to bring that in immediately. I'll need to focus on the constructors. Okay, so let me work through the constructors for officer. So I need an empty constructor. I told you there's no need for so these properties, when I say getters, setters, I'll come to that. but the properties themselves actually serve as getters, setters. Um, what I need for MVC is an empty constructor, which I have here. And then I need a second constructor, uh, which allows me to create an officer. Okay. Now, there are going to be additional things that I need to bring in for associations between officer and supervisor, but I'll wait for that for later. For now, I need to do whatever is necessary to create an officer. So what is it that I need for an officer? The officer, remember, inherits from app user. So whenever I create officer, I'm really creating an instance of app user as well. But I don't want to repeat all of this. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll use this app user constructor. So you can see that there is some additional work being done here. We could also set up some checks on the email, phone number, and so on, whether it's properly structured. But so you can do a lot more work inside of app user for checks. Uh, but what we'll do with this officer constructor, it's it uses app user as its parent. So when we use the constructor for the officer, the child class, we need to do what? Can somebody tell me from any of your previous classes? We use the same inheritance notation, but what do we follow it by with a constructor? Does anyone know, remember from previous classes where you've done inheritance? What do you do? The entire concept is with inheritance, we said, is reuse, right? So we don't want to do everything over from scratch in the child classes. So what do we do? Anyone? We want to reuse, so the hint is we want to reuse this constructor. That's why I said this constructor, this method could have a lot of logic inside. You do have some here with the password hasher. You don't obviously want to redo this code. You're potentially going to generate more errors, but the point is of reusing. So how do we reuse? The parent class is also called what? Parent or what's the other name for a parent class? Anyone? It's called a base or parent class. So what do you think is the name that we use? So we have to reference the parent constructor. So we use the term keyword base, and if you open parentheses, what's it telling you? I want you to start reading the IntelliSense. So what does the IntelliSense tell you? One of two means? Anyone? Okay, somebody's posted. Eden said reuse from app user. Okay, we want to reuse, and that's why you have the base that you're reusing. And I won't have time if I keep asking you questions, but even if you don't answer it, think about it. So one of two means there are two options for what? For two constructors. So the parent class has two constructors, one which is an empty constructor. The second one is, let's move this here, okay, with first name, last name, phone number, email, and password. So 5 parameters. I need to pass these 5. So I'll just put first name, last name, phone number. Oh, it repeated last name, phone number, email, password. Okay. So these are the 5 that I need to pass to the base constructor. And here I do need to specify what I need to send. So I do need to, so if to make it easy, what I can do is copy this, the same sequence, paste it here in officer. So I need to specify the data type here. That's a string. That's a string. Oh, this is also a string. String and string. So basically I've defined the variables that I'm passing to the base constructor. Now, if I wanted to do something additional, which we will see later on, I would put in the child class, okay, child constructor. But for now, that's all there is. I'm not going to add anything else. So I need to make sure I'm close to everything. That's the end of the class. And the namespace itself ends here. So make sure that your curly braces line up. Otherwise, you get a build error. And if you get a build error, you cannot do any migration or database connectivity. Okay. Okay, so now we have officer. Okay, so what I want to do is create, I already have created an officer role. So I want to create a user in an officer role. Okay, so I'm going to say, so I want to do it all inside this. So if, as long as there are no rows in this user stable, I want to keep adding. Okay, so I want to say, so this is not going to be, I'm not going to say I could. Um, by the way, if I want to create this as a child class object, if I try to create, I could create as an app user too, as a parent, and then store it as the child object stored in a variable of the parent. That is possible. We'll explore it maybe sometime in the next week. But for now, I'll just create a child object that's an officer and use the constructor that I just created, sending in. So I'll use the same concept of test. So this is test 3. So each one, test 1, test 2, test 3, and then instead of admin, I'll say officer. And then for the phone number, I'll just go with a sequence of 0003. And the email, I'm going to use the same convention. So that'll be so test1.norol, test2.admin. So this is going to be test3 dot, just to make it visible, I might just break this up so you can see test3 dot officer. So it's the at test.com. And finally, the password is just this part, the first part, test3 dot officer. Okay. And I want to do 2 of them, but let's see how we do the same thing we did earlier, right? Where we created a user, the object, and then use the user manager. So, okay, I'll just copy these 2 lines so that because I'm running out of time. So instead of app user, I'm going to say the officer that I just created. Um, Okay, so this is, hmm. Okay, so what I'm doing here is the same thing as I did previously for this admin. The only difference is the admin is just an app user. There's no separate subclass. Okay, I just assign them to a role, while the officer is a subclass. So I created a subclass um, so that basically it's an officer object. And obviously, I don't want the officer in an admin role. I want the officer in the officer role. Okay. So this is to create a third user, okay, who is in the role of an officer. And then for now, let me just keep that. I was going to create two officers, and the motivation is when we come to the association between officer and supervisor, we want more than one officer, we want more than one supervisor so that we can set up this association. So that was the reason I was wanting more than one. So if you're going to do that, I'll just very quickly add in the fourth user, which will be test four. And then the other changes are going to be somewhat minor. So this goes to test four, and then test four over here as well. And I add that officer in. Okay. So before can run this, I just added officer with all the details behind it. I want to send this class to the database to be migrated to the database. So if I want to migrate to the database, I need to do two things. One is um, I told you that application DB context serves as the class representing the database. So I need to add a property for the new class that I want to send to the database. Okay, so this is something you have to keep in mind every time. Last time, I think I showed you what happens if you don't include this, it just, the migration comes up empty. Okay, um, so for now, okay, so I'm creating this DB set, which is I'm basically telling MVC, create a database set or a database table using the officer class, which we just worked on, and call it on the database, call it an officer table. Okay, so that's literally what we are saying here. And so that's the first step we need to do. And then the second step after we've added it is we have to add the migration over here. So I need to go in, I'll just clear this. I need to go in over here and do the migration, which is add dash migration. And so let me see if you remember one of the things I told you with naming of migrations. What is it? So what would you call this? We obviously are trying to migrate officer. So would I call this migration add migration officer? What would I call this? I told you don't do this because it will duplicate the same class name um, as officer also inside of a migration. So we don't want that happening. So what would you call this based on the naming convention I had suggested last time? Does anyone remember? Nobody? Okay, then you can just use officer and then have it create an error and you can figure out how to fix it. Sometimes making errors is the best way you're going to remember. Okay, Julian said added officer. Okay, I need to give Christian and Julian extra credit for it. Okay, so so the thing is again, please take whatever we have discussed previously, apply it. That's what I'm hoping, expecting of you, like do what Julian did. Basically, we have added a new clause that we want to migrate to the action we want is adding the officer. So added officer is what you want to call this migration. Okay. So I'll say add dash migration space added officer. And obviously this is where I said we first make sure it okay. So it actually, in this case, it's not adding any new code because we don't have any properties that we have added to the to officer. Okay. We only have a constructor here, so which means that if you find that this happens if there is no property, there's really no, if this up down is empty, there's no point adding, uh, in adding a migration. There won't be any SQL generated, nothing done. So in this case, I'm going to say remove migration because so we'll come back and add to the officer when we added some properties, we'll call it, let's say, modified officer. But for now, whenever you see empty migrations, they don't add value, they only clutter up. So I'm going to remove this migration. Okay. And then I'm just going to update the database. And when I say update database, it's going to go repopulate these tables which I had cleared out. Okay, let's see. I need to refresh. Okay, now if I do the select statements here, you can see they are all empty. We recreated the tables, but they are not populated. Okay. Um, so if this would have been deleted, there's no migration now over here. Okay, so the next step is to see if we can populate these users with their different roles. So if I were to run this now, you, uh, so I'll put breakpoints so you can see what's happening. Um, so I'll put a breakpoint here for officer. You create, and I'll take this breakpoint away. So one of the things I've been mentioning is these breakpoints help you to find errors when they occur, but it also helps you with seeing, understanding the logic of a program. So, so let me put a breakpoint inside of officer. Let's say somewhere here. Um, I'll put it here. And then I'll put a breakpoint in app user as well. Okay, so and then let me run it in debug mode. Okay, we came to seed database. Okay, from seed, so this from program.cs, it comes into, I guess I do have a breakpoint somewhere earlier. Well, actually, I don't have a breakpoint earlier. So how do you think so why did I come into this breakpoint? So if you look at this, it's for creating the first user who's test one, no role. So that's the first user I'm creating. So that's how, since I have a breakpoint here, it's coming to it. If I continue, it's going to come in for test two. Okay. And then if I continue on, it's coming. So the previous two breakpoints were actually inside of creating these users here, app users. Now I'm trying to put a breakpoint for officer. So let's see what happens. So we now come inside the officer constructor. Okay, first name, last name. First name is test3, last name is officer. Email test3officer.test.com, password test3officer. Now, if I continue, it's now calling its parent or base class. Okay, so that's how this inheritance works. It goes up the layers from the child to the parent. Now, if I continue, it's going to create the parent. So whenever I create an officer object, I'm also creating basically the parent object. That's why you can have on the left side, you could have it stored inside of the app user class. Okay, so you could choose to have it. So we'll explore some of how we can use different data types if you have inheritance in the next couple of classes. But we're creating that officer and then adding that officer object to the role. Okay, and then we're going through the next officer object. The same thing happens. Okay, and then it opens up. So initially we have logged in without any. So let me see if we have created all our users. So if you come down here and check, we have all four of our users created. Okay. Now, let's see so if you go through all the messages, the logging behind, you can see there is no error so previously when we were not, so if we run it again, we are not going to try to repopulate, but it will just, so you can see, let me do this again. One other thing I do want to do, if I log in as an officer, I think it's test3.officer@test.com. Okay, I use this as my password. I log in. Okay, it just comes back as authenticated user. Now, what I want to do is I'll stop this from debugging, and I'll go in here, and then in the index, I want you to add, if it's an officer, um, so you can go in as else, I suppose. Else if, else, I guess if it's, what's the structure I want? Else, or just, do I need to nest it? Else if, do I want it multiple nested? Okay, else if and else there is, trying to think, is there, which one would be more, okay, I'll just do this for now. Um, There is also, you can use case statements. So I'm just going to say, I'm forgetting if I can just use something off of the else here. But yeah, so I'll just put this as officer, somebody in an officer role. I'll just indicate H1 um, as, okay, in officer role, I can make service requests. Okay, so I'll save this. And this time when I run it in debug mode, um, you will see that it doesn't hit any, it doesn't try to create. So it goes to initial seed database. And then after that, it just comes out without hitting any of the breakpoints. And what that means is that it went to the if statements, and because the if statement said that there were already roles and users that had been created, it didn't go and try to create any new ones. So now if I log in, and I log in as test 3 officer, I just go back here, paste it. Okay, so this is what I want you to do. So let me go to where I had what I want you to work on. Okay, so I have officers we went through, right? So create supervisors. So the after you push it, I'm going to pull and run your app. And the way I will test it is, so you don't have to create office supervisors and mechanics. What I'm going to have you do is create supervisors. Okay, so I want you to create 2 supervisor users. Obviously, you need to first work on the supervisor class for the constructors, create these 2 supervisor users in the role of supervisor, and then I should be able to log in as a supervisor and see this message. So basically, I want you to understand that if you're in a particular role, you could do all these actions. Obviously, we have not set up the menu links for them, but that's what I want you to do. You don't have to worry about mechanics for now. Next class, we will see the connection between officer supervisors, and also we'll go over the remaining, like converting the rest of the classes into, well, whatever is in the class diagram into the implementation in Visual Studio, and then populating the tables on the database and writing the methods for actions as well as for displaying. Okay, I'll stop now. So that's what you need to work on for your individual project. Make sure your group project, your class diagram is meeting all the requirements so that you will implement your group project class diagram just like we are doing this week for the individual project. Next week it will be for your group project. Okay, I'll stop now. If you have questions, you can ask me. If not, uh, I'll see you next week. Okay, you too, Ryan and MK.